Today we're going to be talking about financing state governments, specifically Texas in mind, but this could pertain to pretty much any state government, depending on how you look at it. Not a whole lot of information to get into, but I do want to cover a couple of things that are really important. So, a couple of terms right at the very beginning you're going to definitely want to know. One of them is called goods, public goods, and it's an economic term that's been used in all sorts of other mediums. But basically, what it is this is something. This is some tangible item or sort that people put some kind of value on. And for state governments to have a public good, which means pretty much anybody can have access to it, what it means is it's not going to be something that basically you can say only this group of people gets it or that group of people gets it, or no one can have it, or just something like that. So if it's a public good, it's something that's available pretty much to everybody. So there's a couple of different kinds of public goods that we do want to talk about, and some of the terminologies that are important to understand them. First off, non-exclusive public goods. Um, so this is like the inability to prevent people from receiving or enjoying a good or service, which means, it's basically everyone has to have access to it. Um, and so you can't really put a price on it. I mean, you can put a price on it, but you can't force people to actually pay it. So a lot of times when people are trying to pay for a public good that's non-exclusive, and if government can't just fund it directly themselves, quite often they'll do it through a volunteer process, or they'll do it through some kind of donation system. People give what they can, kind of sort of thing, in order to everyone able to get what they need. But part of the problem with that is if you don't have that available, or if you don't have the ability to pay for it, then basically you may not get the good because you just can't afford it. Then there's no one to actually produce it and kind of keep things going. So, but at the same time, you can't tell somebody they can't have it because it would basically cause all sorts of problems. Example is like the fire department or fire protection. So a fire department protects everybody. And so it doesn't just protect the people on this side of the street or on this block from here to here, or the people who paid a monthly fee. I mean, there were attempts to do that in the past. The problem with that is say you're living next door to somebody who didn't pay for fire protection and their house catches on fire. Chances are pretty good your house is going to burn down too. So now your fire protection people end up having to show up. They show up, put the fire out, and so basically they've given the other person a free fire suppression thing. In way old days, what used to happen is they let the person's house burn down and just kind of go, and then save the one that was like right next to them, which never really worked out because fire spread, and well, you see how that kind of thing goes. So all sorts of things like that. They're pretty much you can't cut down access to it, so you make it available to everyone. So like for a fire department, they're not going to go through and charge each and every person, a certain amount of money, or they lose fire service. What they do is they charge a tax that causes everyone to pay for it. Through like a one big fund, and then that way you don't have to worry about people falling through the cracks of what needs to actually happen. Now you may end up with people who aren't paying their taxes and stuff like that, but that's a completely different issue and that gets addressed in all sorts of different ways. But that's non-exclusive. And so then there's non-exhaustive, which is basically um, it's basically enjoying a good that won't stop anyone else from actually using it. Um, Example is like a street light. you walk down the street and you see the light, and so therefore the light is bathing you and giving you, illumination, whereas it doesn't stop somebody walking on the other side of the street coming towards you because they too benefit from the light. So the idea is it's non-exhaustive, meaning everyone gets it, and it doesn't really cause a problem as to who's using it. So you using it won't make it impossible for someone else to use it. I guess you can stand in front of the light and make it so the person behind you can't see it, but that's really not kind of what we're talking about. We're not talking about keeping stuff away from people. It's generally not something that could be kept away. So let's talk about the different types of public goods. One second. Okay, we have social goods. So this is something that pretty much everyone can benefit from. So a good example of this is public education. Public education wasn't always a social good. You used to have to, educate yourself, or be rich enough and hire people to educate you. But then society realized we could actually benefit from having public education, meaning it enriches everybody, causing people to go, well, now that I have an education, I can give back more to the country that I'm part of. And so the country that you're part of has put an investment into the circumstances to make sure that you get that education. So, like I said, it lifts all boats, as I keep saying this phrase over and over again. That's one of the types of public goods. One of the other types of public goods is toll goods. And so this is it costs to use, but there's no limit to the resource. Example is, and I mean, for toll goods, is like a toll bridge, where you literally, you pay a certain amount of money to go across the bridge. And if you don't pay that money, you can't go across the bridge. But one of the benefits of it, and so again, it's non-exhaustive, meaning people can continue to use it, that bridge, over and over again. And it didn't matter that 10 people used it before you, because the bridge is still there. Now, there is an argument to be made for, wear and tear and stuff like that. Like you could end up destroying the bridge itself after a certain amount of time. But we're not talking about that sort of thing. We're talking about the actual good itself. The ability to go across the bridge that exists doesn't diminish with the next person that comes along. Then we have the third one, which is common pool goods. And so that's like natural resources. So a river, or a lake, or something to that effect, or groundwater, or something to, these are, or even in some cases oil, unless it's actually owned on somebody's property and then they actually have control over it, so it doesn't become a common pool good, it becomes someone's personal good. So, but that's basically how that works. So how do we pay for all this stuff? Nobody know? No, I'm kidding. The way we pay for this stuff is mostly through state taxes. We do state taxes and we do local taxes, and we also do non-tax revenue sources. And let me talk a little bit about all of those. First off, let's talk about state taxes. State taxes have a bunch of different ways of happening. Some states don't even have them, or they have them, but they're not exactly state taxes on the surface. So they're not an income tax. Sometimes they are an income tax. Like some states actually have state income tax. Texas does not. And so the different kinds of things that they tax. So like if you use a particular service, you pay a certain amount of money for that. So like if you have a cable bill, you get a certain amount of tax added to it that you're paying as part of state taxes. And so the couple of different types of state taxes that there are, at least the three different theoretical aspects of it. You have regressive attack, regressive taxes, which is basically it takes a higher percentage of the income from lower income people. Where you have progressive taxes, so you pay a certain amount by depending on like how much you make. So it takes a higher percentage of income from higher income people. And then you have proportional taxes, which you don't see as much these days. And it's more, I'd say it's somewhat theoretical, but there are some areas and jurisdictions trying to do this sort of thing. So it'll be interesting to see kind of where that goes forward. But these take the same percentage of income from every citizen. And so there's been a couple of moves to see if you can get the federal tax to be a proportional tax system, so everyone pays a certain amount, because the theory is to a number of people, and this usually comes from much wealthier people who don't want to be paying as much money as they've been paying, or at least the percentages that they've been paying. The idea is that if everyone pays, like, say, 10% or whatever the arbitrary figure is, everyone will pay that, and therefore that amount of income ends up being how much everyone actually pays. There's all sorts of problems we have built into, especially our income taxes and stuff like that, where what counts as income, what doesn't count as income, what gets allowed to be deducted, and all these things. And so all of these kinds of loopholes kind of build all sorts of economic clout for some and not for others. The second major source I was talking about is like local taxes. There's almost usually some kind of local tax of some sort. So anytime you use a service, you're going to get some kind of local tax added to it. And sometimes there'll actually be a local income tax. All depends on the area that you're at and how much has actually been allocated and allowed by the system that you're actually in. And it's usually done by vote by the people who actually get served by that particular community. And then, as I mentioned, non-tax revenue sources. So it's like all sorts of like fees and charges for using different services. Those types of things all fall under that particular category. So let's talk about a couple of the delineations of state tax, such as what is, like some of the definitions, such as tax capacity. So tax capacity is a measure of the wealth of a state or its ability to raise revenues relative to all other states. So like some states will have far more tax capacity than others, depending on a couple of other factors, but one of the factors is like even how much the people in that state like being taxed. That could have a huge ramification, because if people don't like it, they vote out the people who decide to do taxes. And so you end up with that. And also you may have situations that cause more financial need, so taxes get raised. Or you have some states like Alaska, whose ability to tap into their natural resources, to fill their tax base, ends up paying a lot of their taxes. So it becomes more of a business kind of a tax towards whatever the total thing is, but it ends up counting for each person as the amount of taxes they actually pay. So if that makes sense. So the next definition on there is tax effort, which is a measure of the amount of revenue collected by a state relative to its tax capacity, meaning you only have a certain amount that you can actually collect. And so it's if the idea is if their tax effort is high, they can collect more. They've been collecting more. And again, it also depends on how regressive or progressive your particular locality is at any particular time. And the last thing is it's called tax exporting. And tax exporting is kind of an interesting little phenomena, but it kind of comes from more of a, you know, an economics standpoint to everything, or not even just economics, but basically, you know, fundamental business. Whereas a state will um, export something and import something else. So like we could send oil out to another location, whereas we get coal back, you know, from that same location or that same state. And so the money going in and then coming back out kind of serves as like this, not funnel, but kind of like this um, reverse process to where, you know, it's where the basically you can't have too much going out or too much coming in, or basically you have disparities to where um, the inability to actually meet the demands and needs of whatever the other entity is that you're actually dealing with. So that's basically the idea of how state funding works on a general basis. Like I said, I focus mostly on Texas, but again, it pertains to pretty much any state. This is kind of how things work here. Now, it could be a lot different if you went to a different country because of all sorts of other things. Even their economic system and their social system can cause all sorts of differences. But in general, that explains how our economic financial situation works in this country for our state.